The village lay quiet under a gray sky. Smoke from distant battles hung in the air. Birds had stopped singing. Even the wind seemed afraid. It was 1942 and Europe was at war. Tanks roared somewhere far off, but today they were coming closer. In a small village surrounded by fields and hills, people went about their chores trying to ignore the growing fear. But the ground trembled, and the first distant rumbles of enemy tanks reached the ears of the villagers. Panic began to stir. Mothers clutched their children. Farmers dropped their tools. No one knew what to do. Among them was Lucas, a young farm boy of 17, with sun-browned skin and hands calloused from work. His eyes, bright and sharp, scanned the horizon. Lucas had grown up plowing fields, fixing carts, and dreaming of adventure beyond the village. But today adventure was not a dream, it was survival. The villagers ran to the edges of the village, looking at the open fields where the enemy tanks would soon arrive. "We are done for," cried one man. "They will crush us," shouted another. Fear filled the air like a storm. Lucas, however, did not panic. His mind raced faster than the enemy tanks ever could. He knew the land like the back of his hand. He knew every ditch, every tree, every hidden path in the fields. And he had an idea, crazy, dangerous, and perhaps impossible. He ran to his small barn and grabbed his tools: shovels, ropes, metal spikes, and old farm carts. Every item, ordinary to a villager, was now a weapon in Lucas' mind. He began moving quickly, quietly, setting small traps across the field. A few villagers watched him, shaking their heads. "You are wasting your time, boy," one yelled. "Those tanks will destroy everything. You can't stop them with sticks and mud." Lucas smiled faintly, not stopping. "Just watch," he said softly. His voice held a strange confidence, the kind that made people pause. He climbed the hill overlooking the main road. He studied the approaching tanks. Big, gray monsters, moving like unstoppable giants. Their metal tracks crushed everything in their path. Smoke rose from their engines. The sound of their guns echoed across the valley. Lucas' heart pounded, but fear did not stop him. He moved with purpose. He dug small trenches here, placed spikes there, and tied ropes in clever ways to slow the tanks. His traps were simple, yes, but smart. Each one was designed to confuse, trap, and damage the enemy even just a little. He looked down at the villagers, who were still cowering. Some shook their heads, some whispered prayers. But Lucas felt a fire inside him. He knew that cleverness could fight even the strongest enemy. Brains, he thought, can beat brawn. Suddenly, a tank came into view over the hill. Its cannon glinted in the weak sunlight. Dust and smoke followed it like a cloud of doom. The villagers gasped. Some ran toward the woods. Others froze, unable to move. Lucas clenched his fists. This was it. This was the moment his plan would either fail or become a legend. He ran down to the field again, checking the traps. Each rope, spike, and hidden hole was ready. He whispered to himself, "It has to work, it must." A second tank appeared, closer this time. The ground shook with every movement. Lucas could see the tank crew inside, unaware of the danger ahead. His hands moved quickly, adjusting traps, moving carts, and placing wooden planks to redirect the tank's path. He paused for a moment, looking at the village behind him. Families hiding, eyes wide with fear, waiting for a miracle. Lucas took a deep breath. He could feel the weight of the moment, the impossible challenge ahead. But he did not falter. Then, with a voice calm but full of determination, he shouted to the villagers, "Stay back. Trust me. I have a plan." Some turned to him, their eyes filled with doubt and fear. But others saw the courage in his eyes and stayed. Lucas ran back to the hilltop. From there, he could see the tanks moving faster now, closer and more dangerous than ever. He pointed to the first trap, then the second, then the hidden ditches. "This is our chance," he said under his breath. "This is how we fight and survive." The tanks rumbled nearer, their shadows growing long across the fields. Lucas' heart raced. The impossible plan was about to begin. Every step, every trap, every second would matter. If it failed, the village would be lost. But if it worked, if his cleverness could outsmart the machines, everything could change. He stood tall, looking down at his preparations, then back at the approaching enemy. Lucas smiled faintly. "Let's see if a farm boy can turn the impossible into reality," he whispered. The stage was set. The enemy was close. And Lucas' daring, impossible plan was about to be tested. The suspense hung heavy in the air, and one thing was certain. No one had ever seen anything like what was about to happen in this quiet little village. The ground trembled again, louder this time. The first tank rolled over the horizon, massive and unstoppable, its tracks tearing through the fields like a living beast. Smoke rose in thick black clouds. The villagers' fear turned into panic. Mothers clutched their children. Farmers dropped tools and ran for cover. The sky seemed darker, heavier, as if warning them of what was to come. But Lucas did not run. His heart beat fast, yes, but his mind was sharper than ever. He ran to the first trap he had set the night before. A shallow trench lined with spikes hidden under loose soil. He adjusted it quickly, making sure it would stop the lead tank long enough to slow the others. The villagers watched him, fear and doubt written across their faces. "He's crazy," whispered one man. "You can't stop them with a farm boy's tricks." Lucas ignored them. He had no time for fear. His eyes scanned the tanks as they rolled closer, their cannons glinting, engines growling like beasts from another world. Smoke and dust mixed in the air, making it hard to see. Every second mattered. The first tank hit the trap. Lucas held his breath. There was a loud crash as the front treads fell into the trench. The metal spikes ripped at the underside. Smoke and sparks flew. The tank lurched, stalled, but it did not fall completely. The crew inside cursed, banging on controls. Lucas knew this was just the beginning. The villagers gasped. "It worked," one whispered. But another shook his head. "It won't last. More are coming." Lucas ran toward the second trap, a clever setup of ropes and carts designed to block a narrow path between two hills. He tied the ropes taut, then ducked behind a tree, heart pounding. The next tank approached, following the first. Its treads crushed the ground, leaving deep marks. Lucas' plan required precise timing. One mistake could mean death. The tank rolled into the trap. The ropes snapped, pulling an old cart in front of it. The cart hit the tank's side, forcing it into a ditch. Dust and smoke filled the air. The villagers' fear turned into hope, just a little, as they saw that one tank stop. But there was no time to celebrate. More tanks appeared over the hills, faster and bigger than Lucas had expected. The enemy was smarter than he thought. They adjusted their formation, moving like a single giant. Lucas' traps slowed them, but they would not be stopped so easily. He climbed a small hill for a better view. The tanks were moving like monsters across his land. Their guns were trained on the village. Lucas' stomach tightened. One wrong step and the entire plan could fail. He saw villagers frozen in fear, some ready to run, others holding their breath. Lucas spotted a narrow path between the fields and hills. If he could lead the tanks there, he could control their movement. But it was dangerous. One tank could crush him if he was too slow. Still, he ran, signaling with quick movements to guide the enemy toward the trap. The villagers watched, hearts in their throats. They could see the danger. A sudden shout rang out. "He's mad. He's going to die." But Lucas was calm, almost like he could see the entire battle in his mind. He jumped into position, hiding behind a boulder as the lead tank followed the path he had chosen. The tank rolled over hidden spikes. Sparks flew. The metal screeched. Smoke curled into the air. Lucas' plan was working, but only just. Suddenly, a tank commander appeared in the lead vehicle, scanning the fields. He noticed Lucas' movements. Lucas froze, heart pounding. The commander shouted orders, pointing at the boy. The tank turned slightly, moving dangerously close to where Lucas hid. Quickly, Lucas ducked, rolling to safety. Dust and dirt flew around him. The tank passed just meters away, oblivious to the traps hidden ahead. Lucas took a deep breath, his mind racing. This was too close. Too dangerous. But the plan had to continue. He ran to the final line of defense, a series of deep ditches filled with hidden spikes and ropes. If the tanks fell here, they would be trapped. Lucas worked quickly, sweat dripping down his face. The lead tank was now only a few hundred meters away, rolling like a beast. Suddenly, a second tank appeared on a different path. Lucas had expected only one approach. He cursed under his breath. He could not reach both traps in time. He had to make a choice. Then inspiration struck. He grabbed a bundle of ropes and tied them to an old cart. He pushed it into the path of the second tank, forcing it toward the first trap. The tank hit the makeshift barrier and swerved into the narrow ditch. Lucas' eyes lit up. It was working. His impossible plan was starting to take shape. The villagers watched in amazement. Fear turned into astonishment. He might actually stop them, someone whispered. Lucas climbed the hill once more, looking down at the approaching tanks. Smoke, sparks, and dust filled the valley. His traps had slowed the enemy. But the battle was far from over. The toughest tanks, the largest, the most dangerous, were still coming. He wiped sweat from his brow, breathing hard. His plan was working, but only if he kept thinking, kept moving, kept daring the impossible. The sun peeked through the gray clouds, glinting off the tank's metal surfaces. Lucas clenched his fists. "This is just the beginning," he whispered. "They think they can crush us, but they haven't seen anything yet." The stage was set for the battle to come. Lucas' courage, cleverness, and quick thinking would be tested. The enemy tanks were approaching. The villagers were watching. And the farm boys' impossible plan was about to become a nightmare for the enemy. The valley was alive with chaos. Smoke and dust rose from the first trap tanks. Sparks flew from metal scraping against hidden spikes. The enemy soldiers shouted orders, banging on controls, but the machines did not respond as they expected. The once mighty tanks now struggled like wounded beasts. Lucas stood on a small hill, his eyes sharp and calculating. He could see the enemy commander growing frustrated, barking into a radio as his men scrambled. Lucas' heart raced, not with fear but with anticipation. Every second, every movement of the enemy, was part of his plan. He ran down to the field again, his boots kicking up dirt. There were more traps to set, more clever tricks to deploy. He moved like a shadow, unseen, knowing exactly where the enemy tanks would go next. Old farm carts, metal plows, ropes, spikes. Every simple object became a weapon in his hands. The lead tank tried to reverse out of the ditch, but Lucas had predicted this. He had placed heavy logs in its path. The tank's treads caught on them, jolting violently. Sparks flew. The commander cursed loudly. Other tanks moved cautiously, afraid of falling into the traps ahead. Lucas' traps were simple, yes, but brilliant. He had studied the terrain for weeks, even before the first rumble of war reached the village. Every hill, ditch, and narrow path was part of his battlefield. He led the tanks like a chess master, one move at a time. Suddenly, a tank broke through one of his first traps. Lucas froze, panic flashing for a moment in his eyes. It was the largest tank, painted in gray and green, a monster among monsters. The villagers gasped. "It's unstoppable," one shouted. Others hid behind trees, trembling. But Lucas smiled faintly. He had expected this. He ran toward a narrow pass between two hills, the perfect place for the next stage of his plan. Using ropes and chains, he positioned old carts and plows to form a funnel. The tank could go only one way. His traps were waiting. The massive tank entered the pass. Dust and smoke swirled around it. Lucas held his breath. Then, as if on cue, the tank hit the hidden plow. Metal screamed against metal. The machine lurched, slowed, and nearly tipped. Sparks flew. The villagers held their breath. This was no ordinary farm boy's trick. It was genius. Another tank tried to flank him, but Lucas had prepared for this too. He triggered a hidden pitfall covered with loose soil. The tank's treads sank. It struggled violently, wheels spinning in vain. Smoke rose from its engine. Lucas had turned the landscape itself into a weapon. The villagers stared, astonished. Fear had turned into hope. Mothers whispered prayers of thanks, children peeked from behind fences. He's doing it," one said, disbelief in her voice. Lucas climbed another hill, surveying the battlefield. Sparks, smoke, and overturned tanks painted the valley like a scene from a nightmare. But the enemy was not finished. From the hills above, more tanks appeared. Reinforcements. Bigger, stronger, smarter. The enemy commander's eyes narrowed. He could feel Lucas' cleverness and he hated it. But Lucas did not falter. He had one final trick, the one that no one expected. He took a deep breath and began preparing a line of makeshift explosives. Small metal containers filled with gunpowder, hidden under hay and soil. Simple, yes, but deadly when used at the right moment. He set them in the narrowest part of the valley, where the enemy tanks had no room to maneuver. The ground trembled with each approaching vehicle. Lucas ducked behind a boulder, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the largest tank. This was the moment. The lead tank rolled into his trap line. Sparks flew as metal scraped against wood and stone. Lucas' finger hovered over the ignition rope. He waited, timing everything perfectly. Then, with a sharp pull, the line ignited. Explosions rocked the valley. Smoke, fire, and dust engulfed the tanks. Metal twisted, engines screamed, and the massive machines lurched helplessly. The enemy commander shouted orders, but chaos ruled. Lucas had done it. Villagers ran out, cheering. Fear had turned into awe. They could not believe what a single farm boy had done. Lucas stood among the chaos, breathing hard but smiling. His plan had worked. His cleverness had turned the enemy's strength against them. But the battle was not over. From the distant hills, more tanks were approaching. Reinforcements, bigger and more dangerous than the first wave. Lucas' traps had slowed the enemy, but they would not stop them forever. He climbed another hill, looking at the valley below. Smoke and fire rose like black clouds. Sparks flew from twisted metal. The villagers watched in tense silence. Lucas clenched his fists. His plan had worked so far, but he needed to stay ahead. Every second, every move mattered. One mistake now and everything would be lost. Lucas whispered to himself, "Think, Lucas, think. They may have machines, but I have the land, the traps, and my mind. I can do this." The enemy tanks were coming closer, yet the valley was no longer a simple field. It was a maze of obstacles, traps, and surprises. Lucas had turned the impossible into reality. His cleverness had made a nightmare for the enemy tanks. And yet, deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The largest tank, the commander's tank, still lurked ahead. It would take all his courage, all his intelligence to stop it. The sun peeked through the gray clouds, glinting on twisted metal and burning wood. Lucas' eyes sparkled with determination. "They think they can crush us," he said quietly, "but they haven't seen anything yet." The impossible battle had begun. The farm boy was no longer just a boy. He was the enemy's nightmare, a clever mind standing against unstoppable machines. Smoke hung thick over the valley. The scent of burned metal and scorched earth filled the air. Lucas stood on a hill, his chest heaving, his eyes scanning the battlefield. The first wave of enemy tanks had been slowed, some destroyed, but the war was far from over. The enemy commander's tank, massive and relentless, was still approaching. The villagers peeked from behind fences, clutching each other. Fear had not vanished. It had transformed into tense hope. But Lucas knew better. Hope alone would not win this battle. Precision, cleverness, and courage would. He ran down the hill toward his next trap, a series of narrow pits hidden under loose soil. He had spent hours the previous night preparing them. If a tank fell in, it would be trapped like a rat in a cage. But as he adjusted the ropes and metal spikes, a sudden roar made him freeze. One of the earlier traps had partially failed. A smaller tank, damaged but still moving, had escaped the ditch. It now barreled toward the village houses. Lucas' heart leapt. He sprinted toward it, thinking fast. There was no time for fear. Only action. He grabbed a long rope and tied it to an old cart. With all his strength, he pushed it into the tank's path, hoping it would redirect the vehicle toward another trap. Dust and dirt flew. The tank hit the cart and swerved, narrowly avoiding villagers. Sparks flew from metal against metal. "Watch out!" a villager screamed. Lucas rolled aside just in time. The tank crashed into the second trap, its treads caught in the hidden pits. Lucas exhaled sharply, relief and adrenaline mixing in his chest. But the relief was short-lived. Another tank appeared from a different path, faster and larger. Lucas realized he had miscalculated. He could not reach both traps in time. The enemy commander's tank, the largest of all, was nearing the village center. Smoke and fire rose like a dark storm. A sudden explosion shook the ground near him. One of his own traps had backfired. The ropes had snapped prematurely, and a small fire had started in the grass. Lucas' heart sank. His plan, so carefully designed, was fragile. One mistake now could destroy everything. He glanced at the villagers. Some were running, some frozen, others crying. Lucas' stomach tightened. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a heavy stone. He could not fail, not now, not when so much depended on him. Then he saw it, a narrow path between two hills. The commander's tank was heading straight for it. Lucas sprinted, dodging flying sparks and debris. He set his final line of defenses: wooden planks, hidden pits, and ropes tied to old carts. Each trap had to work perfectly. The massive tank rolled closer. Its metal treads crushed everything in its path. Smoke curled from its engine, cannon pointing straight at the village. Lucas held his breath. Timing would be everything. One misstep, 1 second too late, and it would all be over. He ducked behind a boulder, watching as the tank hit the first obstacle. Sparks flew. Metal screeched. The vehicle lurched but did not stop. Lucas' trap slowed it slightly, but it was too strong. Panic threatened to creep in, but he pushed it back. He could not allow fear to take over. The villagers watched, holding their breath. Mothers pressed children to their chests. Farmers clutched tools uselessly. All eyes were on Lucas. A single farm boy standing against unstoppable machines. The tank commander shouted orders, frustration clear in his voice. "Find him. Stop that boy." But Lucas was smart. He had predicted every move. He ran to the final trap, a hidden pit lined with spikes and ropes. The last chance to stop the giant. He adjusted the ropes, tied them tightly to a cart, and ducked behind a tree. The tank rolled over the narrow pass. Sparks flew as it caught on the planks. Lucas waited, heart pounding, muscles tense. Then with one quick pull, the ropes yanked the cart into the tank's path. Metal screeched, the tank lurched violently, and for a moment, it seemed to hang on the edge of the hidden pit. Smoke rose in thick clouds. Lucas' plan worked, but barely. The enemy commander cursed loudly, banging his fists on the controls. But the danger was not over. The tank righted itself, moving slowly, dangerously. Lucas realized the trap had bought only a few seconds. He had to act fast. He grabbed another cart and rolled it into the path, forcing the tank further toward the pit. Sparks and smoke filled the air. The villagers gasped. Finally, the tank fell into the hidden pit, stuck and helpless. The commander's eyes widened in disbelief. The villagers cheered quietly, still afraid but amazed. Lucas' plan had worked, at least for now. He wiped sweat from his brow, breathing hard. His traps had slowed the enemy, saved the village, and proved that cleverness could challenge brute force. But he knew the battle was far from over. More tanks were coming, bigger and smarter. His plan had worked so far, but every move now had to be perfect. Lucas looked at the valley, smoke rising like a storm over twisted metal and burning wood. His hands were dirty, his clothes torn, but his eyes shone with determination. Fear had tested him, traps had failed and backfired, but he had adapted. He had survived. And deep down he knew something. The impossible plan was no longer impossible. With courage, quick thinking, and a little luck, he could continue to turn the enemy's strength into weakness. The sun peeked through the clouds, glinting off the trapped tanks. Lucas clenched his fists. "They think they can destroy us," he whispered, "but they haven't seen anything yet." The close call had shaken him, but it had also strengthened him. The battle was far from over, and the farm boy's courage would be tested like never before. The valley lay in chaos. Smoke curled over the fields, twisted metal glinted in the weak sunlight, and the sound of distant tanks rumbled like thunder. Lucas stood on a small rise, scanning the battlefield. His traps had slowed the enemy, some tanks were destroyed and others were trapped. Yet the largest and most dangerous tanks still approached, relentless and powerful. The villagers peeked from behind fences, hope flickering in their eyes. Fear still lingered, but the courage of one boy had already begun to inspire them. Lucas' heart raced. He knew the battle was far from over. Every moment counted, and the enemy was learning. He ran toward the narrow pass he had prepared earlier. There he had placed the most dangerous traps of all: hidden pits, plows, ropes, and makeshift explosives. It was risky, but if the enemy fell into this funnel, the tide could turn in their favor. A tank rolled into view, massive and gleaming in the sunlight. The commander inside shouted orders, frustration clear in his voice. Lucas studied the machine carefully. He timed each movement, calculating the exact moment to trigger his traps. With a quick tug, ropes shifted plows into the tank's path. Sparks flew. The vehicle lurched violently, caught off balance. The villagers gasped. Dust and smoke rose in thick clouds. Lucas' plan was working, but just barely. One wrong move and disaster could strike. He sprinted to another position, ready to trigger the hidden explosives. His hands shook slightly from adrenaline, but his mind was calm and precise. The enemy tanks were fast, their engines roaring, their guns ready to destroy anything in their path. Yet Lucas had something they did not: knowledge of the land, creativity, and courage. The first explosive ignited. Fire and smoke erupted, startling the enemy. The tank behind it swerved, its treads catching on a hidden pit. Lucas watched with tense anticipation. Sparks flew, metal screeched, and the tank lurched helplessly. The commander cursed loudly, banging fists on the controls. Lucas' cleverness had forced even the largest enemy machine into chaos. Another tank approached the narrow pass, unaware of the dangers ahead. Lucas ran, ducking behind a tree, then pulled another rope. A heavy cart swung into the path, forcing the tank to veer into the pit. Dust and debris flew. The villagers gasped, awe and disbelief written on their faces. One farmer whispered, It's impossible. He's just a boy." But Lucas did not pause to celebrate. His eyes were on the commander's tank, the largest and most dangerous of all. It moved carefully now, aware that traps were ahead. Lucas had anticipated this. He had one final plan for the monster machine. He climbed a hill, carrying a bundle of ropes and explosives. From here he could see the tank moving slowly through the valley. His heart pounded, but he did not hesitate. Timing was everything. He tied ropes to a series of carts and triggered a chain reaction, sending them sliding into the path of the tank. The massive machine lurched violently, sparks flying from metal scraping against wood and stone. The commander cursed, shouting orders, but it was too late. Lucas' traps had forced the tank into the narrowest part of the pass, where movement was impossible. From his hill, Lucas watched as the tank struggled, its massive treads catching on hidden spikes. Smoke rose from its engine. The villagers cheered quietly, holding their breath with every movement. Lucas' cleverness had turned the enemy's power into weakness. Then another wave of smaller tanks appeared, faster than before. Lucas knew he had to act quickly. He pulled a rope, triggering hidden explosives along the edge of the valley. Fire and smoke erupted, startling the tanks. Some veered off course, some fell into hidden pits, and one flipped onto its side. The commander's tank roared in frustration. He realized his strength was no match for Lucas' intelligence and the clever use of the land. The farm boys' traps had slowed the enemy, destroyed several machines, and forced even the largest tank into a vulnerable position. Lucas' heart raced, but he kept his mind sharp. He could see an opening, a chance to end the battle for the village. Another rope, another cart, and a series of hidden plows redirected the remaining tanks into a final trap. The enemy was clever, yes, but Lucas was smarter. The largest tank fell into the hidden pit, caught completely. Sparks flew, smoke rose, and the engine groaned. The commander shouted, disbelief and frustration in his voice. Lucas had done the impossible, he had turned the tide. The villagers ran out of hiding, cheering. Mothers hugged their children, farmers waved tools in triumph. Fear had been replaced with awe. The small farm boy had done what no one thought possible. Lucas, dirty, tired, and sweating, smiled faintly. His plan had worked. The impossible had become reality. Yet he knew the battle was not fully over. Enemy reinforcements could still arrive. But for now the village was safe. His cleverness, courage, and determination had turned the tide against impossible odds. He looked across the valley where twisted metal and smoke marked the battlefield. His traps had slowed the enemy, his quick thinking had saved lives, and his bravery had inspired hope. Lucas whispered quietly to himself, "They think they can crush us, but they have not seen anything yet." The farm boy had become a hero. The impossible plan had succeeded, but the fight was not done. He knew the enemy would return, stronger and smarter. But for now, Lucas had shown that brains, courage, and cleverness could defeat brute force. The valley was quiet now, smoke rising slowly into the gray sky. Lucas stood tall, determined and ready for whatever came next. The tide had turned, and the farm boy's courage would be remembered forever. The battlefield was a nightmare of smoke, dust, and twisted metal. Fires smoldered where tanks had fallen. The valley, once quiet and peaceful, now trembled with the distant roar of approaching engines. Lucas stood on the hill, eyes fixed on the largest tank, the enemy commander's vehicle. It was massive, armored like a fortress and moving with deadly precision. The villagers clung to fences, hiding behind walls, or lying flat in the dirt. Fear had not left them entirely, hope had replaced some of it, but the shadow of destruction loomed over their homes. Lucas knew the commander would not give up. This tank was smarter, stronger, and faster than any other he had faced. One mistake now could destroy the village, and everything he had fought to protect. He tightened his fists and ran toward the valley. Every step mattered. Every second counted. He carried ropes, carts, and small makeshift explosives, the last of his carefully prepared arsenal. He had studied this final confrontation in his mind for hours. The commander thought he was clever, but Lucas was smarter. The massive tank rolled into the narrowest pass. Sparks flew as its treads scraped over uneven ground. The commander shouted orders, barking into a radio. Lucas ducked behind a boulder, watching carefully. Timing was everything. One wrong move and the tank would crush his traps and him. He pulled a rope tied to a heavy cart. It slid into the path of the tank, forcing it slightly to the side. Sparks flew. The commander cursed loudly. Lucas' eyes were sharp. He had to guide the tank into the perfect position, the one trap that could end this nightmare. Another rope, another cart. Lucas adjusted the direction, leading the tank toward the narrowest point in the valley. Here, the ground dipped sharply into a hidden pit lined with plows and ropes. The massive machine could not maneuver freely. Every step he had prepared now depended on precision. The commander's tank hit the first obstacle. Metal screeched. Sparks flew. The massive treads lurched, struggling to maintain balance. Lucas held his breath. The villagers watched, silent but wide-eyed. Mothers clutched children. Farmers whispered prayers under their breath. One wrong move now and the plan would fail. Lucas sprinted to another position, near the hidden explosives. He lit the fuse of the first line of makeshift charges, hidden under hay and soil. Smoke curled upward. The explosions erupted just as the tank reached the narrow point. Fire, smoke, and sparks engulfed the massive machine. The tank roared in anger and frustration. It tried to reverse, but Lucas had anticipated this. Ropes and carts blocked its retreat. Metal treads ground helplessly against the hidden pits. Sparks and smoke filled the air. The commander's eyes widened in disbelief. Every move Lucas had made turned the tank's strength against itself. The villagers gasped, seeing the massive tank struggle. Lucas' cleverness had created a trap too precise for the enemy to escape. The once feared machine now lurched helplessly, caught like a giant in a cage. Lucas' heart raced. This was the moment that would decide the battle. Suddenly, a smaller tank tried to intervene. Lucas reacted instantly. He pulled another rope, sending a cart crashing into the path of the tank. It swerved violently, crashing into the edge of a ditch he had prepared earlier. Sparks and smoke erupted. The enemy was in chaos. But the commander's tank remained stubborn, its massive frame threatening everything around it. Lucas knew he had to finish this. He ran, placing the final line of explosives and ropes in the perfect pattern. Timing and precision were everything. 1 second too early or too late would ruin everything. The tank rolled forward, trapped completely within Lucas' final setup. He pulled the last rope and the explosives ignited. Flames erupted. Smoke and sparks blinded the enemy. The massive machine lurched violently, metal screeching, engine groaning. It tipped slightly, then fell into the hidden pit. Dust and smoke filled the air. The commander shouted in disbelief, slamming fists on the controls. The machine was stuck, completely defeated. The villagers ran from hiding, cheering. Mothers hugged their children. Farmers waved tools in triumph. They could not believe it. The farm boy, the one they had doubted, had defeated the enemy's greatest tank. Lucas stood among them, breathing hard, dirt and sweat covering his face. His plan had worked. Brains, courage, and cleverness had triumphed over brute force. Yet Lucas did not celebrate fully. He scanned the horizon. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Reinforcements could arrive. The enemy commander might have other tricks. But for now, the village was safe, and Lucas' impossible plan had succeeded. He looked down at the trap tank. Smoke rose in thick black clouds. The massive machine, once a symbol of unstoppable power, now lay helpless in the pit. Lucas whispered quietly to himself, "They thought they were stronger, but brains can beat brawn, and courage can outmatch fear." The villagers gathered around him. Their eyes shone with admiration and disbelief. "He did it," one whispered. A single boy saved us all." Lucas nodded, his chest heaving. "It was not just me," he said softly. "The land, the traps, and quick thinking saved us." He looked across the valley at the scattered, smoking tanks. "But this is just one battle. We must be ready for the next." For the first time, the village felt a spark of hope. Fear had been replaced with awe. One boy had challenged the enemy's might and won. The impossible plan had become reality. The sun peeked through the clouds, glinting off twisted metal and burning wood. Lucas stood tall, determined, ready to face whatever came next. Today the enemy had met a nightmare, an enemy not of strength but of courage and cleverness. And Lucas, the farm boy, had become that nightmare. The valley was silent. Smoke rose slowly into the gray sky. Twisted metal and burning debris marked the battlefield. The once feared tanks lay broken, trapped, or abandoned. The air smelled of smoke, earth, and victory. Lucas stood on the hill, chest heaving, his hands dirty and bruised. His clothes were torn, sweat and grime covering his face, but his eyes shone with quiet determination. The battle had ended, but the weight of what had happened pressed on him. One boy had stood against machines that seemed unstoppable, and had won. The villagers slowly emerged from hiding. Mothers carried children, their eyes wide with relief. Farmers picked themselves off the ground, clapping each other on the back. Some laughed nervously, unable to believe what had just occurred. Others fell to their knees, whispering prayers of thanks. He saved us," one man said, awe in his voice. "A single boy, against all those machines." Lucas lowered his head, humbly brushing dirt from his hands. "It wasn't just me," he said quietly. "The traps, the land, and quick thinking. That's what saved us." But the villagers did not care for modesty. To them Lucas was a hero. A boy who had faced the impossible and turned it into victory. They gathered around him, cheering and clapping. Tears glistened in many eyes, both men and women. Children stared at him as if he were a giant among mortals. The enemy commander's tank lay at the bottom of the valley, smoke curling from its engine. Its massive frame, once a symbol of fear and power, now looked small and broken in the shadow of Lucas' victory. The enemy soldiers had fled, some in fear, some in confusion. The village was safe. Lucas walked among the villagers, checking on their safety. Some homes had been damaged, fences torn apart, fields trampled. But the people were alive. That was what mattered most. He felt exhaustion pull at him, but also pride. Courage and cleverness had triumphed. A group of villagers approached, carrying water and food. "You need to rest, Lucas," one said. "You've done more than anyone could imagine." He nodded, taking the offered water. The reality of what had happened began to settle in. He had planned, risked everything, and acted with precision. He had outsmarted machines designed to destroy entire villages. He had done the impossible. The sun began to break through the clouds, shining on the valley like a promise. Light glinted off twisted metal and scorched earth. Lucas looked at the horizon. He knew the war was not over. Other battles would come. Other enemies would arrive. But today, one village had survived because of courage, intelligence, and determination. He turned to the villagers, their faces filled with admiration. "We must rebuild," he said softly, "and be ready. Today was a victory, but tomorrow, we must always be prepared." For the first time, the villagers felt not just relief, but hope. They had witnessed bravery and cleverness win over brute force. A single farm boy had changed their fate. Their fear had been replaced with admiration and determination. As evening fell, Lucas walked back to his small farmhouse. The fields he had worked for years were scarred, but the land was still theirs. The village still stood. He breathed in the evening air, filled with the sense of earth and smoke. His hands were calloused, his body sore, but his mind was sharp, already thinking of ways to strengthen the village against future threats. Children followed him at a distance, eyes wide with admiration. They whispered stories of the farm boy who had fought tanks and won. Mothers smiled. Farmers nodded. Lucas had become a legend in his own time, not because of strength or weapons, but because of courage, cleverness, and an unyielding spirit. That night, the village slept under a sky full of stars, the smoke slowly fading. The enemy tanks lay defeated, scattered across the valley. The impossible plan had succeeded. One boy had turned fear into hope, chaos into order, and weakness into strength. Lucas sat quietly on the farmhouse porch looking at the valley. His eyes softened. He had done what no one thought possible. He had fought not with guns or armor, but with mind, heart, and courage. And he knew something important. Real strength comes not from machines or power, but from cleverness, determination, and the will to act when all seems lost. The farm boy had become more than a hero. He had become a symbol. A symbol that courage and intelligence could challenge even the strongest enemy. The villagers would tell the story for generations. Children would dream of bravery just like Lucas. And one boy from a small village had proven that no machine, no army, and no fear could stop a determined mind. The sun set over the valley, painting the sky in red and gold. Lucas stood, looking at the horizon, ready for whatever came next. The village was safe, the enemy defeated, and hope restored. The impossible had been achieved. The farm boy had won. And the world would never forget it.